Good morning. I'm Becky Bartosik, President and CEO of your Fox Cities Chamber of Commerce. I'd like to welcome you to our first webinar of 2022. We are thrilled to welcome Joseph Fuller here with us today, speaking on hidden workers and the post-COVID workforce. Joseph is an engaging speaker that I've had the pleasure of hearing at a national conference recently, and I knew he would have a powerful message to share with our chamber members as well. Before we get started, I wanted to share a few housekeeping items with you. First of all, the webinar is being recorded, and we will be sharing the link on our website afterwards in case you want to refer back to the program. Secondly, we have saved time for Q&A at the end of his presentation, but feel free to ask questions anytime throughout the program using the Q&A feature below, which is different from the chat feature. We will note your questions and present them to Joseph during the Q&A session as time allows. Now I'd like to introduce Joseph Fuller, and his credentials are impressive. Joseph is a professor of management practice at the Harvard Business School, the co-director of the school's long-term project, Managing the Future of Work, and a co-head of the Harvard Project on Workforce. He is a visiting fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, where he studies issues related to employment and income polarization and the relationship between talent and economic competitiveness. Specifically, he is focused on the skills gap and opportunities to expand work-based learning programs, such as apprenticeships. His research on credential inflation has been widely cited. His 2021 study, Hidden Workers, Untapped Talent, explores how the processes companies use to attract and evaluate job candidates contributes to the growing labor shortage in the developed world. Joseph's ongoing research focuses on the future of work more broadly, specifically the growth of non-traditional employment relationships, the impact of caregiving obligations on the workforce, and employee productivity, the best practices of American community colleges in working with employers, and strategies for lifting workers out of low-paying jobs. Prior to joining the Harvard Business School faculty, Joe was a co-founder and longtime CEO of the Monitor Group. He is a graduate of Harvard College and Harvard Business School and a director of PVH Corporation, Era Technology, and a trustee of Western Governors University. Please help me welcome Joseph Fuller.
Well, thank you, Becky, for that generous introduction. I hope that didn't cause everyone to think that this is going to be an overly academic discussion today. What I really do want to talk about is the role employers play actually in creating what I'm going to describe as an artificial shortage of candidates and workers. And what I'd like to do now is share a presentation with data from several of the studies I've published recently, but I do want to reiterate that everything that I'm going to show you today is available on our project website. So if you were just to Google Joseph Fuller, Harvard Business School, Managing the Future of Work, you'd find our website in the first 2 or 3 Google entries, and anything I talked about today, there's a lot more data on that website if it catches your interest. So let me share my screen here and hope that the technology doesn't betray me. So let's start with a definition of this hidden workers concept that Becky mentioned, because it's really central to what's going on in the United States today. You may have read variously in the paper that the US has been suffering from a declining workforce participation rate. So about 20 years ago, our workforce participation rate was in the high 60s, actually low 70s, and 10 points higher than the European Union. Today, it's in the low 60s and 2 points lower than the European Union. we have one of the lowest workforce participation rates in the developed world. And it's one of the things that's driving the shortage of workers that many of you are seeing when you put out help wanted ads or job postings. What's driving that? Well, I wanted to understand that, and I want to understand why we seem to have perpetually more job openings than we do people who are unemployed, at least the way we define unemployment. That led me to investigate a phenomenon that I called hidden workers. So last year, we published a study on this population of people who were perpetually on the margin of the workforce. Who were they? And what was keeping them out of the workforce? Those are the questions we're asking. We found that there were about 27 million workers who have attributes that cause them to not get considered by employers who are hiring. The kind of perpetual applicants who never get a job. And we're going to talk about how that happens in a moment, but it's a big number. Let me tell you a little bit who these people are, because when we talk about people who are on the fringes of the labor force, there's some misconceptions. The first is that these are people who actually don't want to get a full-time job or don't want to work at all. Our research completely contradicts that. These are people who are hidden from consideration of employers. They're not hiding from work. They're screened out. They're screened out of the view of of employers, and therefore don't build the type of job history that makes them attractive to the next employers. The biggest category of these, almost 2/3, are people who are caught in part-time work, but want more hours, but can't ever seem to get out of that part-time wage situation. We're not going to have time to go in depth on that, but let's just think about those folks for a second. As they're building their job history and they're in part-time jobs, their qualifications generally fit with other jobs that offer part-time positions. Let's say service staff in a restaurant or a quick service restaurant or another food service outlet. Also, if they're working part-time, they're using that work to pay the bills. So the notion that they're going to go to school while working part-time, particularly if they have caregiving obligations, that's the stuff of Horatio Alger stories. Someone who's, I'm working 2 part-time jobs and take care of my sick mom and my 4-year-old, and I'm getting a degree, and. It's wonderful stuff when it happens, and those people need to be celebrated, but there aren't very many of them because life has a habit. Yes.
I think we need to get your slides to catch up with you.
Okay, I'm still on the circle here.
I think we're still on the cover sheet.
Okay, I'm seeing the circle. So okay. What are you seeing now? Still the cover sheet?
Yep.
Huh. Okay. Well, thank you for telling me that, Becky, because that's embarrassing. And if you're still on the cover sheet, all you're seeing is a big crimson square. So let me go there and go here.
There we go. Hidden workers, big circle.
Okay. Now, when I go to presentation mode, you're not seeing that.
Let's see. We're seeing that somebody commented that we think that you are sharing in the wrong screen. It's not in presenter mode. It's showing the notes.
Yep, I see that. It's always something with technology, isn't it? Let me see. For some reason, it is jumping over. Well, if it's all right with you, I'm going to just present in this mode, because if you can see that, then we're not going to be wrestling with this for another 10 minutes. And
sure.
It will be slightly less visible, but I also have provided the chamber with these slides. So if you'd like to get them hard copies, they can be provided to you. So I was showing this, which is the distribution of hidden workers. We just talked about those people missing hours, those 63% in the light green, who are part-time workers seeking full-time work. Also, there are people who are inactive, retired, but who want to work, that upper right-hand side, where you can see another third of these hidden workers are actually half of that third, so about 15, 18% want to work, but they are not currently employed. And then there's a very small minority who are the so-called long-term unemployed or very long-term unemployed, who are really on the fringe of the workforce. So what I wanted to understand is how that vast majority, the 96%, why do they find it so hard to get into the workforce? Now, if this would be an academic problem, if so many employers weren't anxious about who they can find. About half of US employers say we can pretty much find the talent we need. That has a very heavy geographic overlay, by the way. That's more likely to be a company in Texas or in Florida than it is in Wisconsin or Massachusetts. But as you can see here, when we ask respondents, do you get the quality of candidates you need? Just over 40% says, yep. Quantity, yep. Am I getting them fast enough to fill my openings? Only 45% of employers say we are. We're getting a flow of applicants that matches up with our demand for applicants, and only just over half say I'm getting a good enough diversity. What drives that? Well, one of my propositions to you it's the way we assess candidates early in the hiring process. Most of you will use either a service like an Indeed, or you'll have an applicant tracking system as part of, for example, a Workday installation if you use that software, or PeopleSoft if you're an Oracle shop. And what happens is that in the hiring process, your hiring manager, your recruiters set filters inside that applicant tracking system so that help you zero in on the candidates that are best suited to your job the way you've described it in that computer program. This is using classic AI to make decisions for you. And if you look at most US systems in their resource management system, or RMS, we evaluate middle skills candidates. That's going to be people applying for jobs that don't require a college degree, but require a little bit more than just a high school diploma, maybe a certificate, maybe a license, or maybe an associate's degree. We look at middle skills candidates disproportionately with 5 or 6 different filters. For example, the most common is, do you have these specific credentials and job experience I'm looking for? Or do you have a government issued ID? Are you legal to work for me? You'll notice also number 3, do you have a gap on your resume of more than 6 months? You're unemployed for more than 6 months? We'll come back to that in a minute. For high skill candidates, once again, it's a resume, it's are you legal, but once again, things like referrals, professional credentials, and that continuity of employment filter are used. These are used to both exclude candidates, to filter, so I can tell the AI, look, if you've got someone with another filter who has a criminal record, or you have someone who doesn't have a college degree, you can just exclude them from further consideration, kind of a 1-0 outcome. Or variously, these rankings can be used to say, well, okay, AI, rank the candidates that didn't get filtered out by the most attractive to least attractive, given what I am the employer have told you I'm looking for. Now, I'm going to give you a little bit of an eye crosser chart here, but this is how filters are used for both middle skills candidates and high skills candidates across the United States. I just want to point you to a couple or 3 examples here. So for higher skill candidates, things like academic performance often is heavily weighted. So you can see in the light blue bar to the upper right-hand side for a high skilled candidate, academic performance, what level you graduated, do you have an associate's degree, a bachelor's degree, did you complete high school, is used to rank 51%, that upper right-hand number of candidates, and to filter 39%. So that would mean 39% of the job postings out there in the United States would say, if you don't pass the filter of this level of education, you're out. Let's go to some more subtle ones though. Let's go to the sixth one down on the list to the right. It says employment gaps in resume. That's an employment gap of more than 6 months. For a middle skills candidate on the left-hand side, that dark green bar, 48% of the time in the United States, an employer looking for a middle skills worker, less than a college degree, will exclude a candidate from any further consideration if they have a employment gap of more than 6 months. Now, why would an employer do that? Well, you all employ people, so you might say to yourself, boy, more than 6 months, maybe that person doesn't have a lot of get up and go. Maybe they don't have a lot of self-efficacy or drive, or gee, business is changing pretty quickly. 6 month gap may be already falling behind, may not be really know what the current products out there in the market, if they're going to be a sales associate, or maybe we put in some new technology, a new warehouse management system or a new inventory management system. So they're probably less likely to know that. And remember also, you're not looking to interview 250 people. You're trying to zero in on someone who's highly qualified for that job. So if I can get someone without a gap versus someone with a gap, well, I'd rather have someone without a gap. Now that gap might have the effects that I was just talking about, but you can have a gap like that because one of your parents was really ill or worse yet dying, or because you had a problem pregnancy, or because you're a military spouse and you got transferred from Camp Lejeune to Honolulu. And when we start building filters like that in, and they become absolute filters, in-out filters, we start excluding people from consideration who might have really good qualifications on multiple other dimensions. Imagine you're looking for 10 different things in an employee, someone who would get on a scale of 1 to 100, 90s on 8 of those attributes, but gets excluded because of that consideration, or gets excluded because they didn't use exactly the same language to describe their skill set that you put in your job description. So we end up screening out an awful lot of people. Now, there's another very, very damaging effect of that. Why are people locked in part-time work? Because what they say they can do doesn't speak to the needs that most people have when they set up these types of AI filters. And also they're more likely to suffer from things like gaps in their resume. So to someone who's got a part-time job perpetually looks to the AI like someone who is highly qualified to have a part-time job, but not qualified for the position that I have advertising. Well, the funny thing about this is that using these filters causes people to exclude qualified candidates, and employers admit it. So when I surveyed employers in the United States, they said, we admit that some, most, or all of the time for middle skills workers, the way we're going about searching for them excludes qualified candidates, and 90% of the time for high skilled hires. So employers know that they're using some blunt instruments here, but they're still not going back and asking, what do I need to do to stop excluding qualified candidates in the teeth of an epic labor shortage, which is going to continue because we have a lousy workforce participation rate? One of the self-inflicted wounds here is employers rely on old job postings, particularly for middle skills jobs. When they are going out for new hire, over 70% of the time, close to 80% of the time, they either just use what they've got by way of a job description or modify it slightly. Now, for higher skilled jobs, they're more likely to make some modifications. But many of you are hiring middle skills, and of course, only about 40% of Americans have a college degree. So higher skilled jobs are a minority of job postings in the United States. When you have a dated, only slightly updated job description, that is what's informing the AI. AI uses natural language processing, it's called, scans your job description, and is trying to make matches with the employee's application. So if you've got a dated job description, particularly if it's using older terms, or if you just modified it slightly to put in, let's say, 2 or 3 additional things that you're looking for, you're beginning to create a job description that's more and more complex, seeking more and more skills, and more likely to be out of phase with what the applicants are telling you. In fact, there's a whole little business now of how applicants can use technology to fool the technology that is keeping them from consideration. Because the universality of these ATS systems, 99% of the Fortune 1000 use them, means that if you try to get a job in the United States, which isn't going to be being interviewed on the campus of University of Wisconsin-Madison, or yeah, my uncle or my friend or whatever got me this job interview, if you're going to be picked up through a normal applications process, these systems are being used, and the data on which they're relying is often very defective. It's a dated job description that relies on filters that tend to try to winnow down the pool fast. It's like we're trying to be so hyper efficient in hiring that we create an outcome which is other than what we want. And guess what? We don't get the outcomes we want. Employers know that not only are they excluding qualified candidates, but that a majority of the time they end up with people through this process that don't meet all the job requirements they had in the first place. So here you can see for middle skills on the left, higher skills on the right, almost the same numbers. That's most of the time, more than half the time, or all the time, the people that get yielded by these processes, 60% of them don't meet the specification. So in some ways, this is a kind of a Rube Goldberg setup. We've invested in all this technology. What it has the effect of, we know it excludes a bunch of qualified candidates, and the people it does provide very often don't meet the specification. I mean, this is sounding, forgive me, but this is sounding like a government operation all of a sudden. How could that be? Now, there's also an effect on the worker themselves. Here's an average distribution of people who are in these categories in terms of their success in getting interviews or hires. So the average person in this category applies for a job about once every month to 6 weeks. They have a 20% success rate in terms of getting an interview. And they have about a 7% success rate in getting a full-time offer. Now imagine if you're applying every 4 weeks for something, and 4 out of 5 times you don't get an answer. In fact, you don't get an interview. In fact, you often don't get an answer. And even then, only a third of the time, so now we're down to that 7%, a third of the 20%, you actually get an offer. And let's go back to what we said about the filters. What's happening to my resume if I'm applying, rejected, applying, rejected, applying, rejected? That continuity of employment filter, that's 6 months or more, that clock is running. So if I have a bad stretch in applying for a job, all of a sudden I'm bumping up against additional filters. Maybe now there's a new certification or a new computer program or other data tool that people are applying that I don't have the experience in. So that name of that product or the acronym isn't in my resume. Let's say that in the meantime, I've taken a part-time job. So the notion that I'm going to go to a job fair or go to my community college and get a certificate or get trained up in something or be able to interview when interviews are available, suddenly that's standing in the way. And the problem compounds to create a permanent underclass of hidden workers. Now, if you look at US workers here, in how they're applying for 20 jobs, 20 to 25 jobs a year. And this is my data. They get on average 2 offers a year, 2 offers out of that 117. Now, the funny thing is when you look at people who are hidden and talk to employers who have specific programs designed to engage these folks, what do? You get an awfully good worker. So we surveyed employers who have programs for cultivating hidden worker populations. And who are these hidden workers? Yes, it's people that had dropped out of school, but it's also veterans. It's people with mental or physical health challenges. It's people with criminal records. And there are a growing number of programs, let's say for people with some engagement with the criminal justice system historically, like second chance initiatives that companies set up to try to open new pools of talent to bring them into their workforce, or at least consider them for workforce and exclude some filter that's keeping those people out. When you talk to companies who have programs like that, they say the workers that get through those programs are more innovative than the workers I get in my normal hiring program. Their attendance is higher, their engagement is higher, the quality of their work is higher. There was a manufacturer that I dealt with who's introduced me to their two most productive shop floor workers, both of whom are deaf. And by having a program to work with people who are hearing impaired, they're able to find two terrific workers. Why is their disability a help on a shop floor? It just could be that, they don't have so many distractions and whatnot. But by finding a resource that understands a hidden worker population and finding ways to accommodate whatever it is that's keeping those workers on the margins of the workforce, you can tap in to a talent source that helps relieve that constraint. Now, workers in the United States are unusual in so much as they have a lot of self-efficacy about who's in charge of building a future for themselves. This shows in research I've done about when you ask a hidden worker, whose responsibility is it in life for, to create opportunities for you to get a better paying job, for you to move up? 71% of them say me. So this part of what we think of as the American dream or the American narrative is borne out. By the way, I did this for 14 countries, and in a live audience, I might say, does anyone want to guess what of the 14 largest economies in the world have the lowest self-efficacy? Since you can't raise your hands, I'll just tell you it's France. It's about 40% for French. More Frenchmen think the government is responsible for their futures than Frenchmen think is responsible for their future. So there's some not very generous assumptions Americans are prepared to make about some of our allies that actually are borne out by some data. But this really shows that if you engage workers in opportunity to move up and to get a good paying job, they'll take it. Now, down to the bottom is a survey I just released about two weeks ago called Building from the Bottom Up. And we asked employers and workers, low-wage workers, the types of workers be either entering entry-level jobs or maybe be in a hidden worker population historically. How do you do as an employer, or how does your employer do in terms of creating a way forward for you to get a better job? On the top there, I know this might be hard for some of you to read, I apologize, but those kind of green going to yellow, that's the employer's self-evaluation. So the employer is saying more than half the time, yeah, we do a really good job of that. Well, that's interesting because less than a third of employees say, my employer does a good job of that. What you're going to regularly see in some of the data I'm going to share with you next is employers have a pretty, they're pretty soft graders. They give themselves pretty high marks about how they're really providing people with opportunities to advance. And my research further shows, by the way, that lower wage worker develops a strong sense of loyalty to an employer who gives them that opportunity to advance. Many of you may be worried if I invest, let's say, in training a worker so they could take on more responsibility, how do I know they're not going to just leave? Good question, but my data suggests that there's a substantial increment in loyalty and desire to stay with an employer who does make that commitment to the employee. And in fact, the principal driver of turnover in many entry-level jobs, shop floor jobs, is that the employee has lost faith that the employer is going to have an opportunity for them to make more. So they're willing to move for 10 cents more, 25 cents more an hour, or for $1,000 signing bonus. Let's look at what prevents people from adding the skills, either to get a better job or to qualify for a promotion or advancement. You can probably read those yourselves. But first, they don't have a lot of money. They can't stop working the hours they are working to spend more time in training. For example, 54% of people enrolled in community colleges are working learners. So, they don't complete their degree programs very, very quickly because they're working 20, 30, 40 hours a week, and they're fitting a school around their schedule. And imagine your schedule, if your work schedule changes every week, doesn't make it very easy to go to class. They're just busy. They may have kids, parents, a spouse that they've got to care for. Importantly, they don't know what to study. They don't know options out there. They don't know what type of new credential which would make them more attractive to an employer or more attractive for advancement. So I always put one gratuitously confusing chart in all presentations to try to impress people how we can overcomplicate things at Harvard. And here's the one I'm going to show you today. This just looks at where employers on the vertical axis give themselves pretty high marks in terms of how they perform in supporting workers, both to get a good job and to expand their skills so they can earn more, and contrasts it with, on the horizontal axis, what the workers say. And you can see that awful lot of those dots, which are one of 60, what I call touch points in my research of parts of employment, are above that mean line, which says the employer is giving themselves a much higher score, or a much higher score, particularly in that dashed circle area, than the employees give them. And you see that, I'll try to make this simpler by focusing in on the areas that have the biggest impact on whether somebody gets a job and keeps a job and starts advancing and becomes more productive. It falls disproportionately in three areas. The first is my supervisor or some other mentor is supporting me. That's those dark blue spots in the top of the three variables in the red dash box. Notice how their negative numbers below, -50, -40, -30, that's the spread of the employer's self-evaluation minus the negative evaluation of the worker, of my employer's support for me in providing mentorship. So when you have numbers like -50, it's a big spread. Companies give themselves really good grades on things like mentorship and support because they have a mentorship and support policy. They say, oh yes, we want our frontline supervisors to really be encouraging our workers to be better and to improve their skills and whatnot. Well, I don't know how many of you, for example, are in manufacturing setting, but your frontline supervisor probably has 25 people on their shift. So they're going to spend 45 minutes with each one of them twice a year to provide them mentorship and support, and what are their ambitions and what could they do about it? Well, what about meeting the production ticket for today and every day? So, a policy does not make implementation happen, particularly in more discretionary areas like providing mentorship or providing learning and development opportunities, which are the light blue categories, or a distinct pathway for advancement. What do I mean by that? If you do these three things, you will be a candidate for, let's say, a promotion to a supervisory role or promotion to a more value-added role in the operation. So there are multiple examples of shortcomings in the way we as employers create opportunities for workers to come into the jobs we're trying to fill. Here's an example of contrasting the employer self-rating on providing specific coaching on how to move up versus on the top versus the workers doing that on the bottom. Once again, you'll see a big spread. So almost 50% of workers say that never happens around here, or that rarely happens around here, which is funny because almost 50% of employers say, yeah, that we do that regularly. And by the way, I don't doubt that those of you who are listening to me today or who responded to this survey who are everything from CEOs to site managers, I don't have any doubt that they answered these questions honestly. I think they genuinely believe it's happening. But if your workers say it's not happening, they don't have any reason to make that up. You know, and whose responsibility is to make it very clear that, for example, pathways opportunities are available to you in my company, or if you join our company, you're going to have the opportunity to advance because we've got internal training, or we'll direct you to the things that allow you to earn more. It's not the employers, if you've made it so confusing that the candidate or the worker doesn't know how to do it, that's on us as employers. That's not their fault. The same thing in terms of providing supervisory support, same type of spread. You know, this is one of the most perilous examples. This has to do with soft skills training. So that's not a technical skill, but the ability to deal with others, the ability to communicate spontaneously, effectively. For example, write an email about what happened with a customer, or report back on a customer interaction, or what went wrong with the process or the machine. Here you'll notice that employers regularly say the reason we don't hire, or the reason we don't advance lower wage workers or entry level workers is, you know what, they're really lacking soft skills. That's the green to yellow part of the distribution. Well, that's funny because incumbent low wage workers, the types of people you'd hire out of hidden worker population in that red orange band, that's what they're saying in terms of their self sense, their own sense of their soft skills. So, well, you know, 2/3 are saying, I absolutely have the soft skills to move up. Now, as employers, we may say, you know, people delude themselves. They're not really very objective. There's another explanation for that. Nobody's told them that our feedback mechanism, either to a candidate, this is what you're missing, or to an incumbent worker that might be able to fill a role you're having trouble filling, they are not getting clear feedback. Where they're certainly not getting it in a way that they take it on board. But sure, we've all had subordinates who just couldn't take it, couldn't hear it, and that happens. But when you've got 2/3 of these workers or these candidate workers saying, oh, I got the skills, then we're talking about a systematic failure of our ability to give clear and actionable feedback to people about why they didn't get a job, or what they need to do to get that next job that's going to make them economically independent. And you have the exact same distribution about hard skills. So, you know, we see very consistently that we've got the workforce we've got, and we've got the workforce problems we've got, not only because we exclude a bunch of candidates that may be attractive, but we don't make the most of the human assets we have in hand. We don't take the pool of workers that we're evaluating based on a personnel file and the fact they haven't missed a day in 3 years, who's in a lower wage job, so we're not giving them the support and the opportunities to occupy those jobs you're having trouble filling. And that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Please remember what I said, that workers tend to stay where they feel that someone's supporting them and investing in them. Workers tend to stay where they're comfortable, they've got friends, they know they can be productive, they know how to get to work on time. They're less likely to jump to another employer if they feel there's some kind of reciprocity and mutual commitment. But if they feel that I'm in the job I've got no hope, and about 1/3 of these workers say, I don't really have much hope of advancing here, then they're always shopping. Why wouldn't they? Wouldn't you? I mean, think back if you had a position in your career when you just said, there's, you know, either I'm blocked by people my age or younger who are above me to, I don't believe this outfit is committed to giving me the types of opportunities I think I've earned and deserved. Many of us, I'm sure, have changed jobs one or more times just based on that logic. That applies to entry-level workers, that applies for low-wage workers, that applies to candidates choosing between employers. It's no mistake that big employers like Amazon and Walmart and Starbucks trumpet things like, oh, we're going to give you education benefits. Very few workers actually use those benefits, but it's a pretty good marketing message if you're trying to attract talent in a tight labor market. And as I mentioned, just in summary, the type of investment you make in workers, you get returns on that are not immediately apparent, but you get returns in lower turnover. You get returns in better applicants because you develop a reputation for being an employer that creates opportunities for people. And if you work with groups that can help you access hidden worker populations, like veterans, like offenders, like people with various impairments, you get a double dividend of a more productive, engaged worker who's less likely to leave. So, Becky, let me come back to you, and I'll stop sharing this with my defective technology.
Well, thank
And
you.
apologize for that again, and looking forward to any questions from the audience.
Thank you so much. During this portion, we will take any questions you may have for Joseph. As indicated at the beginning of the program, please use the Q&A feature below, which is different from the chat feature, to submit your questions that you may have. We do have a first one right away. Let's see. Regarding rank and filter, what will it take to change the HR paradigm of exclusion in evaluating candidates to a paradigm of inclusion? In other words, look for how the candidate could be successful versus not successful.
Boy, that's a great framing of the question. And, as they say sometimes in courtroom dramas, asked and answered. What is it going to take? We have to move to a skills-based paradigm. Too few companies invest the time, for example, particularly large companies, to look, they use AI to screen applicants. They don't use AI to screen their own workers, to isolate what are the variables that are consistent with success in this role, so that I take that understanding and map it in to the way I search. So if you know that you've got 20 site managers in a multi-site organization, a retailer, QSR franchisee, distribution logistics companies, and you can isolate, here are the workers that have been exemplary in terms of their productivity, or candidates for promotion, always max out their bonus. Can we figure out what it is about them that stands out? You will see things like maybe a shared academic background. I've been working with a large aerospace company, and they interview and recruit at the big aeronautical engineering programs, and there are a number of great ones in the United States. But if you look at their data, about 1/3 of the campuses they recruit on represent about 75% of the engineers that get promoted quickly. So just saying to that recruiting, that the talent manager, why don't we just prune the bottom 5 programs that we're recruiting at? And instead of just limiting ourselves, we're only going to hire 10 people at the University of Washington and 3 people at Princeton, which strangely has a good program. I don't want to get on a plane that some Princeton guy designed, I'll tell you, but that's just me. Rather than have that artificial constraint, let's just hire 12 at Washington and 5 at Princeton, and give it 5 offers, because that's what correlates with success. So we want to build filters that look for affirmative filters. These are the skills I'm looking for, not, oh, criminal record, 20 years ago, not hiring them, doesn't have a bachelor's degree, but has 10 years of experience in job, not hiring them. Oh, mysterious, 40-week gap in their work history, not going to hire them. I mean, those are all inferential. We're guessing. That, guessing isn't good business.
Oh, agreed. Well, and you may have covered on this already, but the next question, are you seeing any movement toward job descriptions being written or rewritten and hiring based on competencies versus occupational requirements?
A bit. What I'm mostly seeing, though, is people relaxing their filters, but not changing them. So there, between 2010 and 2018, there was a distinct tendency in the United States to take jobs that had not historically required a four-year degree and bump up that requirement. And I just released a paper last week on how that's been actually reversing in certain jobs, starting in 2018, because there was a bull labor market 2018, 2019. I mean, you all experienced it, I'm sure. And so that caused people to say, I can't get anybody, maybe I should just take down this. And then COVID turbocharged that, because there were certain jobs. A big tendency, for example, in nursing has been that hospitals want registered nurses with bachelor's of science degrees, called a BSRN. And strangely, where that came from is that US News and World Report started using percentage of nurses with a BSRN as a variable in their rankings of hospitals. So all the hospitals want to rank higher. So they all wanted this, they all wanted BSRNs all of a sudden, because that was a variable they could affect. Well, all of a sudden in COVID, when critical care positions in nursing were open nationwide, man, that BS requirement disappeared for a lot of positions. But I'm not seeing yet skills-based, a real pivot towards skills-based hiring. There are few thought leaders in that. I say Accenture with their hiring, IBM with their hiring, and often innovation and these sorts of things starts with big companies. So I know many of you are saying, well, what do I have in common with Accenture? It's $44 billion in revenue. Well, often innovations get pioneered up there and they flow down market as people understand how to do it. One encouraging thing I'll just mention, Becky, and then turn it back to you, is that I've been contacted by virtually all the big companies that provide this technology. And the first call I took, I was like, do I want to be wearing a Groucho Marx mask or something, because they're going to yell at me and, tell me, you teach at Harvard, we thought you're supposed to be smart. This is the dumbest thing we ever read. And they're all the same. Every single one of them had the same, very polite and thoughtful posture, which is, we know what you're saying has got merit. Tell us more about what you think we can do to make our product better. Oh, and by the way, we really like it when you tell our customers that you need to think about this differently, because we're giving them what they're asking for. And what they're asking for is a process that gets them from a big stack of applicants to 3 or 4, not even 13 or 14, 3 or 4 candidates as fast as possible. Absolutely get rid of everybody that isn't as close to perfect. Well, that's great, but let's look at the data I just showed you. More than half of employers saying we're not getting the talent we need anyhow. And by the way, we admit the way we do this is kind of goofy. We know we're excluding candidates that are talented, but we're in such a rush to do it as fast and as cheaply as possible. Well, we're just going to live with that. Well, my proposition is, this is like the old performance anxiety dream some of us had, where the exam's about to end, we turn over the exam paper and there's a question on the back that we didn't know was there. I mean, it's like there are variables we're applying zero coefficient to, like, do these people turn over a lot, and are they fast? We ignore that in this rush to minimize the cost of hiring, and it's bad analysis. And if you're more thoughtful about it, you will change the way you do this and you will benefit from it.
Thank you, Joseph. The next question was, have you looked at job seekers calling employers to have them take a second look at a screened out application? Put another way, can we train job seekers better?
We can train job seekers better about how to go about the search process and how to describe themselves. So this is a classic problem with veterans. Veterans are a very particular type of hidden worker because veterans are disproportionate. They're very dedicated to being extremely specific about what they did in the service. In the service, it's bad form to kind of say you did stuff you didn't do, or you say you were a technical sergeant in charge of repair and maintenance at an air wing. That's not the way United Airlines describes their job. But the military guys are disproportionate. Well, this is the language we use. And so they often end up with applications that the AI doesn't reason. It's literally just looking for word matches. So we have to teach applicants, look, if you were a program director at your old employer and they went out of business or you moved or whatever it is, and you're applying for a job that is essentially your program director job, but it's called program manager, your mom would forgive you. Just call your old job program manager. Look at the language in the description and use it. Don't add value. Don't embellish. Don't describe it a little differently. For lower skilled workers, very often they don't know, for example, if you're applying for an admin job, an office support job, many of them won't put in high proficiency in Microsoft Office. They just kind of assume if I'm applying for a secretarial job, obviously that. Well, the AI is not obvious to the AI. And a final thing is getting employee candidates. A lot of candidates apply for aspirational jobs where the employer is perfectly right to say, gee, sorry, but you're just not skilled. You don't have what I need. Well, teaching people coming out of high school or in high school, look at what they need and what you don't have. Don't try to bluff your way through it. Go get it, or at least think about trying to get it. By the way, those overloaded job descriptions I talked about with too many skills, they disproportionately cause women to drop out of the process. Women are much more likely to take it literally. And if they see a job description with a bunch of stuff they're not sure about, they are much more objective about, I really don't have those skills. I'm not going to play. Men will try to bluff through it. That much better for them to read it objectively, say, yeah, I really can't do that. And if I want this job, maybe I need to find a way to learn that or get that experience and apply for it next year.
That's very interesting. So one of the people watching asked if you could share the website you mentioned earlier with more data. If you could share that with our team, we will make sure that we post that.
Great.
At the same time.
I'll be happy to.
Wonderful. The follow-up question after that, the trades industry that doesn't have an aggressive rejection for criminal background greater than 2+ years, employment gaps, educational requirements, and promote entry-level candidates. The pool is still slim.
Yeah.
What could the trade industry do better? Because I feel that we don't restrict these areas as heavily as other industries now.
Yeah, and yes, that's true. And yes, the talent pool is slim, and there are a couple of explanations for that. The most obvious one is that, forgive me for taking a little bit of a Sunday sermon tone, but in the last 30 years in the United States, in well-meaning ways, we've done a lot to cause young people to think about certain types of work as beneath their dignity. That if well-meaning but badly informed athletes and entertainers, and frankly why we have a society where people think that a quarterback or a hip-hop singer knows what the heck they're talking about. But this is beyond me. But put that little grumpy old man comment aside. The social leaders, political, office holders that constantly say, gotta go to college to make it America, gotta go to college to make it America. We don't publicize that if you are an auto diesel mechanic, it takes about 4 months to learn to be an auto diesel mechanic in the United States, and you're going to make 70 grand next year. But it's the kind of general tone about what you want your kid to do, what you want to do as a team. And when they and one thing that has happened both at high school level in the United States and at community college level in the United States is advising on careers is extinct. In high school, advising is about you flunked the standardized test, you got arrested, you seem to have a substance abuse problem, you're involved in a pregnancy, and the notion that Mr. Smith or Ms. Jones could say, "Gee, Joe, you really love working with your hands. Have you thought about from high school applying to the carpentry union?" Or, "Becky, you love to write, but there are jobs in technical writing that pay really well, but and you can write your poetry in the spare time, but if you go and get that technical writing degree at the local community college, you will get a job, and then you'll have the wherewithal to live a decent life and then engage in your other passions." That just doesn't happen anymore. And we either need to change that with more online support and better data available to young people, or we have to really think even in our local communities about what the narrative is, starting with parents. Because I can go to an audience and say we need to celebrate the ability to have an economically secure household. That doesn't necessarily mean go to college, and someone in the audience will say, "Did your kids go to college?" "Oh, so it's college for your kids, not for my kids." What I'm trying to say is post-secondary something for every kid, with the ambition of getting them the basis to form a household, to have economic security, and maybe then they complete college. Western Governor, it's a great online institution, best performance for students in the United States, or maybe their kid goes to Harvard. But you're all in, you got to go to college to make it America. We immediately 60% of kids, you're a failure. And it's very debilitating. Not that I feel strongly about any of this.
Well, thank you, Joseph. The last question we had was, where can I find this presentation? And I can answer that one for you. Every participant will receive an email with a link to the PowerPoint and a recording. Plus, this will be posted on our website at foxcitieschamber.com. So we just really want to thank you. What great information. And this concludes our program for today. We hope you enjoyed learning about hidden workers and the post-COVID workforce. Remember, we will be posting a recording of this website for your reference. And we just hope you have a fantastic day. And once again, thank you, Joseph, for all this great information.
Thank you, Becky. Pleasure being with all of you. Sorry I couldn't be there in person.
Maybe next time.
Maybe next time.